I hope the days come easy and the moments pass slow.
Mindanao remains to be the center of gravity, and we are fortunate that we're with us tonight, our friend from the Center for Humanitarian Dialogue, or CSD, with a person or liaison officer, our friend David Gorman here. So David, we would like to welcome him in this presentation as we wanted to get interview.
Thank you, Bernie.
A little of what they're doing now, CSD, is part of.
Very good. Nice to be here.
Well, it means that we are concentrating small on bringing together community in order to be able to resolve problems that are the bigger magnitude that really affect the entire country. Clearly, as of the moment, we are focused now on conflict here. How far have we gone with dealing with all this specific people?
Well, that's right, Bernie. I think that, it's rather glib and cliche to say it, but frankly, the problems are going to have to come from the people themselves and the communities themselves. So we're trying to support efforts at two levels. One is with the MILF and government peace process as part of the International Contact Group, which we participated in the negotiations, offer advice to the two parties and the Malaysian facilitator. And then secondly, and sometimes I think even more importantly, is, at least for the longer term, is support the local mediators themselves down in Sulu in particular, where we provide advice and support to local mediators to help resolve local conflicts. So what happens is two parties in a conflict over something, it can be something significant like a land dispute, a political dispute, or even some of the smallest disputes. We've had large-scale conflicts, people killed over what started with a fight over a coconut. And what we do is we provide support to mediators that they will often identify. So they'll say, well, we would like this person, maybe it's someone that we work with already, or maybe it's not. And they'll agree on that person, and then we'll say, okay, well, we'll provide support and advice. We participate in the negotiations themselves as well to provide a bit of professional input.
How do you exactly choose these people?
Well, the two parties often choose it. And the qualities I think that they decide on is the credibility of the person, oftentimes the impartiality of the person, but not always. Sometimes they do prefer someone who's been a bit partial for some reason or another. But obviously it has to be with the agreement of the two parties. I think that's the bottom line.
Agreement of the two parties.
Agreement of the two parties and who the facilitator will be.
So the government is also very much involved in this.
The government's involved, very much so. We brief the military and the police and the local district, local government units, whether it be the mayors, the barangay captains. They're all briefed and often involved in one way or another, depending on the conflicts. Yeah, the military and the police have played a very important role in this, of course.
But you can't have in to a certain issue of things when it's already full-blown?
Oh no, we certainly do.
Usually
we do. In fact, I think always, because that's when it's out in the front and center.
When there is something happening?
When something's happening, I think some of the members have even been caught up, pretty close to getting caught up in firefights even. But unfortunately, you are driven by the conflict that is most important at that moment, and that's the one where there are incidents going on and the threat of even worse to come immediately. So there's a lot of conflicts in Sulu. There's a lot that are very latent that could pop up at any time again. And we do try to also look at those, and we have a matrix where we identify the most serious conflicts, but also the most solvable conflicts. We don't just pick a conflict because of its seriousness. We also pick a conflict because sometimes we think it has the right mix of potentialities for success, which might be that two parties themselves believe that they can work out a negotiation through dialogue. They just need some help.
I think you're right, because sometimes people don't like to be, interfere.
Well, there's a time and a place for those, but not now. I mean, there's so much to choose from, and I think we'd rather focus on those that seem to have some willingness. But that's not always the case. We picked some that the parties, there's been very serious conflicts in the parties. One party or the other wasn't particularly interested, and we did try to push things, and I don't think we made that much headway.
But the larger scale, we are dealing with the conflict between government and the rebels. And we have had to, we have with moral national relation. At this time, we are focused and concentrated on the effort of bringing together the MNLF and our joint plan. So, we tell us how far also you reach the goal in
with the MNLF or with the MILF?
With the MILF.
Well, with the MILF, I think we've been involved in peace processes here. We started with the MNLF back in 2005 when we helped start discussions between the MNLF led by Chairman Nirmaswari and the government. And at that time, it was led by Secretary Teresita King-Delis, who's now goes back. And what we had done is we helped the two parties to identify what were some of the issues that were contributing to the current fighting in Sulu at that point. And one of the main issues was the revisiting of the implementation of the 1996 agreement. And as a result of that, the OIC and Indonesia in particular have been playing a leading role in trying to work out those issues. Libya? Libya's been involved in various ways. They have monitors on the ground, and they, of course, were the ones responsible for the 1976 agreements. In fact, only 2 weeks ago, I was at Gaddafi's house, where I think they had some talks in the big tent.
But it's still tense and everything is still
Libya?
unstable?
Yeah, it's still a problem. But anyways, back to Mindanao. So that's what we did with the MNLF, and now I think they've gone as far as they probably feel they feasibly can. And now they started to work on the MILF process, which I think you could probably see the MNLF process went to here, and then the MILF process goes up to here. It builds off it. It builds off the 1996 agreement. It encapsulates it. It goes further, wider, broader. So we're focused on that and trying to help the two parties in that negotiation. I think that I'm pretty optimistic that there's a lot of potential for a solution between the two parties. We've seen enormous strides, both in the sense of the commitment and the will of the government in their gesture to the grand gesture of meeting with Chairman Haj Murad in Japan. I think that demonstrated the President's personal interest and commitment. And then I think the MILF's dropping of independence. So you can see here, these are fairly momentous events that have happened. And I think that now it's just going to come down to a bit of creativity and a bit of courage.
You see the greater hope?
Yeah, I do.
The next few months?
I certainly do. I think this is natural what's happening here. Each party, we expected each party to present one draft and another draft. And we knew these drafts weren't going to be the same. So I think that's very normal. It's just now we're trying to find whether it be a common draft or a common agreement or whatever it's going to be. But I think that the contours of an agreement and the details of the agreement, they're not that terribly far off. They're all from the same area. Yeah, I've been involved in negotiations elsewhere in the world. Believe me, I've seen them a lot further apart than these two parties are now. And those other processes also reach solutions.
So what can you say about it? Is there any difference or similarity? Could you compare and contrast the MNLF issue with the MNLF dealing?
Well, I think so. I think that, again, though, the MILF agreement does go, I think, a little bit more further, learning from the lessons of what's happened with the 1996 agreement. So that's probably an important distinction. The two parties, I think, really positions are very much influenced by what happened in 1996. And they want to have an agreement that is broad in its inclusion of issues and people, can be implemented. It's something that deals with the manifold issues of governance, security, territory, and development. So I think it's taking into account all those issues. So I think I've learned a lot from 1996, and we do learn from failure.
Well, in dealing with this, we'll be back for more talk with David Gorman, and we will ask him about how he was able to understand the culture, because first and foremost, you got to know the people. Now, we'll be back after this.